Thank you, Nina and Ricky. Good evening, everyone. I'm Alma Angeles for NET25 World News. On tonight's headlines. American and Russian officials have met in Saudi Arabia and reached an agreement to end the war in Ukraine. A potential peace deal after nearly 3 years of conflict. Could this be the breakthrough we've been waiting for? Stay with us as we break down what they've agreed to and what happens next. NET25 World News starts now. In a significant diplomatic development, U.S. and Russian officials convened in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to discuss potential resolutions to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The U.S. delegation, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, engaged in over 4 hours of discussions with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and other Russian representatives. The talks, hosted by Saudi officials, were described as serious and businesslike, focusing on normalizing relations and exploring avenues for peace. Here's more. On the left, the U.S. delegation, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. In the middle, the Saudi hosts, their Foreign Minister and Security Advisor. And on the right, the Russians, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and a presidential aide to Vladimir Putin. Now, this image was unthinkable after 2022. Remember when Western officials would get up and leave when Lavrov started speaking? Yet here we are, the Americans and Russians talked for more than 4 hours. Now, the United States has released a statement outlining 4 key areas of the agreement. First, they'll establish a mechanism to address what they're calling irritants in the relationship. While that term remains vague, both sides hope to normalize relations and potentially appoint ambassadors. Second, and perhaps most crucial, both sides will appoint teams to discuss Ukraine. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was clear about the priorities.
This needs to be a permanent end to the war and not a temporary end as we've seen in the past. We know just the practical reality is that there is going to be some discussion of territory and there's going to be discussion of security guarantees.
Third, post-war cooperation. The official statement reads, "We agreed to lay the groundwork for future cooperation on matters of mutual geopolitical interest and historic economic and investment opportunities which will emerge from a successful end to the conflict in Ukraine." Fourth, both sides promised to maintain engagement, including the possibility of a Putin-Trump meeting, though no date has been set. Now here's where things get interesting. Russia has signaled its first major concession, and it's significant. While they're asking Ukraine to drop NATO membership aspirations, they're now open to Ukraine joining the EU.
This is the sovereign right of any country. We are talking about political integration and economic integration processes. And here, of course, no one can dictate anything to any country, and we are not going to do so. We do have completely different approach though to questions related to security and links of Ukraine to military and security alliances. That approach is completely different and you know full well about it.
In what appears to be a coordinated move, the U.S. has already agreed to the NATO question.
A big part of the problem was Russia for many, many years, long before Putin said you could never have NATO involved with Ukraine. Now, they've said that. That's been written in stone. And somewhere along the line, Biden said, no, they should be able to join NATO. Well, then Russia has somebody right on their doorstep, and I could understand their feeling about that.
Effectively closing the door on Ukraine's membership. But today's meeting suggests this is just the beginning of a series of potential concessions. Perhaps most significantly, Washington has indicated that sanctions relief is on the table. The U.S. position is clear. Once a deal is struck, sanctions will have to be lifted, and this could extend to territorial compromises as well, though the specifics remain unclear. But where was Ukraine in all this? President Zelensky, also in the Middle East today, wasn't invited to the talks. His response was unequivocal.
Ukraine will not take part in the talks in Saudi Arabia. Ukraine did not know anything about them. Ukraine regards any negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine as ones that have no result, and we cannot recognize any agreements about us made without us, and will not recognize such agreements.
Secretary Rubio tried to address these concerns.
In order to bring an end to any conflict, there has to be concessions made by all sides. We're not going to predetermine what those are. We're certainly not going to negotiate this today or in a press conference for that matter. But, and there are other parties that have sanctions. The European Union is going to have to be at the table at some point because they have sanctions as well that have been imposed.
But here's the catch. The U.S. is driving a hard bargain. They're seeking a 50% share of Ukraine's rare earth minerals, plus access to ports, energy, and infrastructure. While Zelensky has rejected this deal, the Riyadh talks may have left him with limited options.
The question is not just about simply taking the resource. The question is what you invest, so that something comes out of this resource. We are not just a simple supplier for raw materials, and I think this point should be clearly reflected in the document.
In fact, Zelensky was scheduled to visit Saudi Arabia this week, but postponed his trip after these talks. The Riyadh reset has effectively boxed him into a corner, with Europe possibly being his last hope.
It is clear that the European Union, just like the USA, must make a contribution to securing peace, once peace has finally been achieved. But there must be no division of security and involvement between the USA and Europe. And as I said, don't take the fourth step before taking the first. The first step is for Russia to realize that it cannot simply continue its criminal war of aggression.
While Russia seems thrilled with the talks, calling them positive and praising the Trump team for departing from Biden's position, we're still dealing with statements of intent rather than concrete measures. But make no mistake, the very fact that America and Russia are sitting at the same table discussing Ukraine's future marks a seismic shift in international relations. The key question now is whether these initial concessions will lead to a broader deal and what might mean for Ukraine's future. With the U.S. already showing flexibility on NATO membership and sanctions, and Russia opening the door to EU integration, we may be witnessing the first steps toward a dramatic reshaping of Eastern European geopolitics. Now, the U.S. and Russia have agreed to restore diplomatic relations at the meeting in Saudi Arabia between senior American and Russian officials. The meeting also focused on the Ukraine-Russia war and how to bring it to an end. Here's more from Thomas I. Likeness.
The talks are a prelude, a first step in negotiating an end to the Russia-Ukraine war. Only American and Russian officials attended the meeting in Riyadh. Ukraine and the EU watched from afar on the sidelines. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says reaching peace is going to be a long and difficult journey. He says he came away from Tuesday's meeting convinced that Russia is serious about ending the war.
Whether we can ultimately reach that outcome will obviously depend on every side in this conflict's willingness to agree to certain things. So I think it's important to have this meeting because we haven't really had much engagement with the Russians for almost 3 years.
Rubio says there's going to have to be some give and take to settle things, and he hints there could be some changes to the Ukrainian-Russian border.
In order to bring an end to any conflict, there has to be concessions made by all sides. We're not going to predetermine what those are. We're certainly not going to negotiate this today or in a press conference for that matter.
Presently, Russia controls about 1/5 of Ukraine's land and doesn't want to give that up. Another sticking point is possible Ukrainian membership in NATO. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says allowing Ukraine to join the alliance is a direct threat to Russia and unacceptable.
We explained to our colleagues today what President Putin has repeatedly stressed, that the expansion of NATO, the absorption of Ukraine by the North Atlantic Alliance, is a direct threat to the interests of the Russian Federation, a direct threat to our sovereignty.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had not been invited to the meeting. He says negotiations should not take place behind the backs of Ukraine. Zelensky says he doesn't believe either Kyiv or Moscow can win on the battlefield, but he questions Russian President Vladimir Putin's sincerity about ending the war.
If there is goodwill to end the war, I don't believe that Putin wants it. But if there is a will, then there should definitely be a prisoner swap first of all.
Back in the United States, President Donald Trump spoke from his Mar-a-Lago club. He says he's encouraged by Tuesday's talks.
Well, much more confident. They were very good. Russia wants to do something. They want to stop the savage barbarianism. I mean, what's going on over there? It's soldiers are being killed by the thousands on a weekly basis. It's ridiculous.
While he says Russia wants peace, Trump had few kind words for Ukraine, and he dismisses Zelensky's concerns that Ukraine has not been part of the peace talks so far.
And I'm very disappointed. I hear that, they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago without the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives, and without the loss of cities that are just laying on their side.
Trump also says Ukraine should hold elections.
A situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, or essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating. And yeah, I would say that, when they want a seat at the table, you could say the people have to. Wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, it's been a long time since we've had an election? That's not a Russia thing. That's something coming from me and coming from many other countries also.
And the U.S. president said he would support Europe deploying peacekeeping troops in Ukraine as part of a peace deal. Meanwhile, European leaders watch, hoping however this war is resolved, there won't be further Russian aggression leading to future changes to the European map. Thomas I. Likeness, NET25 World News.
And as those talks in Riyadh wrapped up, Ukraine reacted with a mix of gloom and dismay. Officials in Kiev have expressed concerns that the Trump administration is appeasing Moscow. Adding insult to injury, the negotiations in Saudi Arabia began just hours after Russia launching a barrage of drone attacks across Ukraine. Tragically, at least 2 people were killed, 26 injured in those strikes. One of the drones struck the top floor of a residential building in the central city of Dolinska, leaving a mother and her 2 children injured and hospitalized. A difficult night, according to local governor Andriy Rykovich. And even as the talks in Riyadh concluded, air raid sirens wailed across Kiev, sending millions scrambling for shelter due to the threat of Russian ballistic missiles. Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to President Zelensky's office, called it absurd for Moscow to talk about peace while simultaneously killing Ukrainians. He stated that the latest barrage of 176 drones represented Russia's true negotiating position. China opposes Vietnam's construction activities on a disputed islet in the South China Sea known as the Bark Canada Reef, its foreign ministry said today. Occupied by Vietnam since the 1980s, the reef in the Spratly Islands is claimed by several countries in a dispute that has intensified as China and the U.S. vie for influence in the strategic Southeast Asian nation.
南沙群岛是中国的固有领土，百礁是南沙群岛的一部分。中方一贯反对有关国家 在非法侵占的岛礁上开展建设活动。
Vietnam's foreign ministry did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The study added that Vietnam had dredged a channel 299 meters or 327 yards in width at the reef, sufficient to berth large vessels such as warships. Last year, China rebuffed Vietnam's claims of sovereignty over the Paracel and Spratly Island chains, saying its own claims to the two were backed by history. Vietnam has previously cited full legal basis and ample historical evidence for its claims to the reef. Tensions are escalating once again in the South China Sea. The Philippine Coast Guard is accusing the Chinese Navy of dangerous and reckless behavior after a Chinese helicopter flew within just 3 meters, that's about 10 feet, of a Philippine government aircraft. Now, this happened Tuesday near the Scarborough Shoal, a hotly contested area in the South China Sea. The Philippine aircraft was conducting what they called a maritime domain awareness flight, essentially patrolling the area within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. The Philippine Coast Guard called the Chinese Navy's actions a clear violation and blatant disregard of aviation regulations. Philippine Coast Guard in a statement said this reckless action posed a serious risk to the safety of the pilots and the passengers.
The helicopter should have observed the proper and safe distance. Dahil alam naman natin how dangerous it will be. Konting banggaan lang, no? With that close proximity can lead to disaster. As far as our action is concerned, what we did is legitimate and routine maritime domain awareness flight. It is not illegal, and if you're going to ask me who is the one carrying out such aggressive and illegal actions, that will only be the People's Republic of China.
China, however, it is disputing the Philippine account. The Chinese Military Southern Theater Command claims the Philippine aircraft illegally intruded into Chinese airspace and that the Philippines is spreading false narratives. They said they took action to monitor, warn, and drive away the aircraft. The United States has condemned the Chinese actions, with the U.S. ambassador to Manila calling the Chinese helicopter's maneuvers dangerous. In a significant development, Thai Prime Minister Paitongtarn Shinawatra announced today that approximately 7,000 individuals rescued from illegal call center operations in Myanmar are set to be transferred to Thailand. The Thai government is moving swiftly to address this pressing issue. In a related effort, China is preparing to repatriate about 200 of its nationals found in scam compounds along the Thai-Myanmar border. This initiative is part of a broader multinational crackdown on illicit online operations in the region. The UN reports that criminal gangs have trafficked hundreds of thousands of individuals into these scam operations across Southeast Asia, with many victims forced to work under deplorable conditions. The Chinese nationals are scheduled to return home on a commercial flight departing Thursday from Mae Sot, Thailand, a town bordering Myanmar's Myawaddy. This operation underscores the collaborative efforts between Thailand, China, and Myanmar to combat these fraudulent networks. Myanmar authorities have recently detained 273 foreigners in scam operating compounds around Myawaddy, and this action coincides with a visit by senior Chinese officials to frontier towns on both sides of the border, highlighting the intensified regional focus on dismantling these illegal operations. Now, despite operating for years, these centers have only recently come under renewed scrutiny. The turning point was the rescue and return to China of actor Wang Xing, who was abducted in Thailand after being lured with the promise of a lucrative job. And this case has brought international attention to the pervasive issue of human trafficking and forced labor in scam operations throughout Southeast Asia. Now, back here in the country, the Bureau of Immigration has raised concerns about the increasing number of Filipinos being lured to work for offshore companies in other Asian countries, which operate similarly to Philippine offshore gaming operators or POGOs. In a press briefing at the palace, BI spokesperson Dana Sandoval highlighted that approximately 118 Filipinos have been recruited to these so-called scam hubs, which masquerades as business process outsourcing firms.
Usapan kung paano yung arrangements. They are offered like the last one I saw was 50,000 pesos a month, free board and lodging, free meals, free travel. So ganda ng offer. But the truth is it's not real kasi pagdating doon, it's really a scam hub. So doble-doble layers yung victimize doon sa mga kababayan natin kasi sila po ay pinapunta doon, naloko, pero hindi pala totoo yung trabaho, hindi sapat yung sweldo sa kanila or hindi sila pinapasweldo.
And the BI urges Filipinos to exercise caution and thoroughly verify overseas job offers to ensure their legitimacy and to protect themselves from potential exploitation.
So allow me to issue a stern warning to our kababayans. If you see a posting in Meta or Facebook or Telegram or wherever asking you to go to any of the following countries as CSR, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, I'd rather not go to those places because you have a 50-50 chance of being tortured as indicated by Ma'am Dana. 50-50 chance of being tortured. And we have rescued Filipinos and Filipinas who were actual torture victims. We have videos of Filipinos being tortured in Nyawadi na na-rescue namin. And hindi natin kayang sikmurain. Then lastly, I'm calling on all our Filipino nationals here in the Philippines. If PAOK arrests you together with foreign nationals in scamming hubs, we will file criminal charges against you.
And the news continues here on NET25. We'll be right back. In a bold move, just months ahead of the federal elections, billionaire Clive Palmer has launched his new Trumpet of Patriots party, drawing inspiration from U.S. President Donald Trump. With a net worth of $2.1 billion and a history in politics as the former head of the United Australia Party, Palmer vows to contest all 150 seats in the lower house and the Senate. He promises to make Australia great again by championing policies modeled after Trump's approach amidst growing discontent over rising living costs. Take a look.
Australian billionaire Clive Palmer launched a political party on Wednesday, citing inspiration from U.S. President Donald Trump just months before the country's federal election. The mining magnate is Australia's 18th richest person with a net worth of $2.1 billion, according to Forbes. He previously led the right-wing Australia Party and served as a lawmaker for 3 years from 2013. Palmer said Wednesday that his new Trumpet of Patriots party plans to run candidates in all 150 seats in Australia's lower house and the Senate.
The party believes in the policies of Donald Trump, which has shown to be effective in bringing management back on track. Peter Dutton has stated that he's no Donald Trump, and we agree with him. Albanese's presided over a declining standard of living for our country in each and every year he served as Prime Minister. Australia needs Trump policies. Australians want them.
Palmer also said his party would, quote, make Australia great again, referencing Trump's plans to cut government size. He was also critical of mass immigration and said that the party would only recognize two genders, reflecting positions also favored by Trump.
Australia should be for all Australians living here.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has not announced the election date, which could be as early as March after the central bank lowered interest rates on Tuesday. His government has seen its popularity drop because of rising living costs.
U.S. President Donald Trump said he intends to impose auto tariffs in the neighborhood of 25% and similar duties on semiconductors and pharmaceutical imports, the latest in a series of measures threatening to upend international trade. Take a look.
Donald Trump has played his next move on tariffs. The US president said Tuesday that he would impose levies of about 25% on imported cars and similar duties on drugs and chips. Trump says his action on tariffs is already producing results.
I do want to say while I'm up here, I've been contacted by some of the biggest companies in the world, and because of what we're doing economically and through tariffs and taxes and incentives, they want to come back into the United States. And we'll be announcing various very large companies, the biggest actually, and they'll be coming back, having to do with chips and having to do also with cars.
Trump also said more details on the auto tariffs would come on April 2nd, a day after cabinet members are due to report to him on options for new measures. He has long complained about what he sees as unfair treatment of US automotive exports. The EU, for example, imposes a 10% levy on vehicle imports, or 4 times the duty imposed by the US. However, Washington collects a 25% tariff on most imported pickup trucks, protecting a lucrative part of the market for domestic makers like Ford and Chevrolet. Trump says tariffs on drugs and chips will also start at 25% or above, and then go substantially higher over the course of the year. He didn't set a date for starting those levies, saying he wants to give pharmaceutical and tech firms time to set up US factories. Since his inauguration a month ago, Trump has stacked an extra 10% tariff on all imports from China. He's also set a March 12th start date for tariffs on imports of steel and aluminum. And while he has postponed measures targeting Mexico and Canada, he's also told his team to draw up reciprocal tariffs matching those imposed by all trading partners. Major export stocks were among the decliners in Wednesday morning trade in Asia following the news. In Japan, auto brands Mazda and Subaru both fell around 2% in early trade, as did drug maker Daiichi Sankyo. Over in Taiwan, chip giant TSMC fell around 1%.
Heavy snow has hit Japan today, February 19, as a cold front sweeps across the central regions of the country. In Niigata Prefecture, where over 3 meters of snow have already fallen this winter, roads and buildings are now blanketed in fresh snow. The Japan Meteorological Agency has issued a heavy snow advisory, predicting up to 70 centimeters or about 28 inches could fall in just 24 hours along the Sea of Japan coast. A JMA spokesperson said, "We expect the winter weather to peak today before temperatures start to rise next week." The cold snap has brought extremely low temperatures, with Morioka recording a chilling minus 21.2 degrees Celsius this morning. Meanwhile, Sapporo saw 42 centimeters of snowfall in just 12 hours, marking a record for February. As the snow continues to fall, disruptions are being felt across the country. Flights have been canceled and train services delayed due to the severe weather conditions. More than 150 false killer whales have stranded on a remote Tasmanian beach, with rescue teams racing to save the surviving marine mammals, according to authorities today. Now, initial assessments indicate 136 of the large dolphins remain alive on the isolated beach near Arthur River, approximately 250 miles from Hobart. The false killer whales, an endangered species that can reach lengths of 20 feet and weigh up to 3,000 pounds, resemble their namesake killer whales. Rescue efforts face significant challenges due to the beach's remote location, difficult ocean conditions, and limited access for specialized equipment. Eyewitness footage shows numerous dolphins scattered along the windswept shoreline, with some still struggling in the shallow waters before rescue teams arrived. The cause of the mass stranding remains unknown. And with that, we end tonight's broadcast. For everyone here on NET25, I'm Alma Angeles. Thank you for joining us. Good night.